Good morning to everyone. Happy Friday. I'm Terrell Strayhorn, Provost and Senior Vice President for Academic Affairs here at Virginia Union University. And I'm so delighted that you would take the time to join us for this, our first episode of the new Faculty Spotlight series, sponsored by the Division of Academic Affairs. Today, I'm excited to have with me Dr. Cleve Tinsley IV, who has joined the Virginia Union University faculty as Assistant Professor of Religion and Africana Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences. He is also serving as the Director of the Center for African American History and Culture. Dr. Tinsley earned his master's and PhD in religion from Rice University, where he concentrated on studying African American religions. His research focuses on Black identity constructions and how he employs inter and anti-disciplinary theoretical and analytical strategies and explorations that seek to uncover the religious nature and meaning of African American formations, awareness of the heterogeneity, complexity, and contingency of identity formations in modern Black social life. Dr. Tinsley is quickly emerging as a noted interpreter of contemporary African American religion and Black freedom movements. He's also co-author of the book Embodiment and Black Religion, Rethinking the Body in African American Religious Experience. And he's currently working on a monograph entitled Making Black Lives Matter: Race, Religion, and the Struggle for African American Identity. Dr. Tinsley expresses his excitement about joining the VUU faculty. He has hit the ground running, already starting to advance the agenda and vision of the Center for African American History and Culture, and he agrees that the time is ripe. It's never been a better time for expansive and rigorous scholarship in the humanities and social sciences that centers the original intellectual and pragmatic contributions of African and Africana peoples. In just a moment, Dr. Tinsley will come and he will share an introduction, talk with us about his scholarship, talk with us about the center. I encourage you to use the Q&A or the chat box to almost like a roster, let us know who's in the house. You can raise questions. All of this is being recorded so that you can share it with others. We're delighted to have Dr. Cleve Tinsley on our faculty here at Virginia Union University. And without further ado, I would like to introduce to some and present to others, Dr. Cleve Tinsley IV.
Greetings. Thanks for having me, Provost, and hello, Panther family. It's an honor to be here with you.
Thank you, Dr. Tinsley. So to get started, would you tell us a little bit about your doctoral training and then the thrust of your research?
Sure. So my doctoral work is in the critical academic study of religion, or the study of religion as a discipline. Now, many consider it a kind of potpourri of disciplines. One wonders, what exactly does that mean and how does that differ from theological studies per se? And how I would like to describe it is really a discipline of comparison and also trying to understand sameness and difference in religious expressions. Meaning we all, as scholars of religion, try to understand what's the fundamental impulse and what are the rudimentary elements of what entails a religious reality. But then we also try to do comparison to say how one lived reality is different from others and how people's trying to engage in self-expression and a transcendent meaning and belonging begin to do that. So that's what I do as a critical scholar of religion. But I also like to say I use religion as a portal to engage as a critical theorist of religion and Black studies. So that's kind of how my doctoral training was involved. I would say I'm also excited to be here at Virginia Union because prior to that, my training was at Princeton Theological Seminary as a social ethicist. And there I consider myself a pragmatic theologian, asking questions about what does it mean to not only be Christian, but how does it really engage in democracy and make us a better place to live in. So that kind of broadly kind of constructs the nature of my work.
That's fascinating. And I know that in the introduction, I shared about your monograph, Making Black Lives Matter. And we're living now in this Black Lives Matter movement. I mean, what we witnessed this summer with social protests all over the country. Can you talk a little bit about the monograph, the sort of
Sure.
thesis that you're advancing in the work? And then I'll come back with a follow-up about your opinion about the whole Black Lives Matter movement.
Right. So what I'm essentially arguing in my first monograph is that we've not done a robust enough job of really doing more analysis on what the nature of Black religion is. In other words, like launching from people like Charles Long, who's was fundamental to stirring many theorists like myself, we began to understand that Christian expressions of religion is just one valence of that, and we typically assign that to traditional religions, but there also is something else at work there. And so in my monograph, I spend my whole first chapter theorizing really the nature of Black life in Black social life in America, launching from folks like Orlando Patterson. I talk about social death as a category for American religious meaning making. And then what I do is theorize about what religion is as a struggle for identity, launching from folks like Durkheim, of course, other theorists like Du Bois, who talks about spiritual strivings. Well, what I'm really up to is trying to show how Blacks in this country have always struggled. Religious struggle is really about living into these superstructures of meaning and belonging. To spin off your own work there about identity and meaning is important, right? And so we all try to live into some superstructure that we think is authoritative. And what I do is begin by, in chapter 2, studying Black Protestants, the 7 traditional denominations. But then I moved to something else. I moved to Black Greek letter organizations and show how, through a sociological analysis, we can see them engage in the same type of struggle for meaning and belonging in social context, and how that is coerced sometimes by our social environment. And I conclude that study by pointing to our contemporary moment, meaning the Black Lives Matter movement, or what we see as uprisings for racial justice, have been part of the long history of when we think about religious analysis. For instance, 1831, Nat Turner right here in Virginia began uprising. You think about people like Fannie Lou Hamer in my home state of Mississippi. And so my last chapter, what I try to conclude is that if we look at activists as well, which includes artists, activists, educators, and scholars as well, they're also engaged in what I call this Black religious struggle work, what Du Bois calls spiritual strivings, in that they're also trying to construct meaning and identity, but also pressing these structures to say, but there's something more there. There's something about Blackness as a category that we've reduced down to race. There's also something much more abstract and metaphysical that can't be contained by any category, I argue, but also any discipline, which is why I talk about anti-interdisciplinarity. One of the theorists who's formed me most is Monty Perry, who's at Princeton right now, and she was foundational in talking about how our methods should be determined based on the critical questions we're trying to answer. And so as I began working on this monograph, I started with what question am I trying to answer and what methods are best for answering this question. So I use ethnography, but I also use photography and visual ethnography and video. And my study is based on 2 years of ethnography work in Houston, Texas, going from churches and studying Black Greek letter fraternities and sororities, and also activists in the city right after Sandra Bland in 2015. And so I like to say this, I was over the moon for the opportunity to come here. For that reason, Virginia Union brings together all of these formative communities for me, not just the church and the Black theological tradition, but also Black community law dread, but also as being in the social sciences, I think there's so much fresh perspectives we can bring to understanding and analyzing religion, and Black religion specifically, in ways that is right for right now.
That's so helpful. I mean, you've talked about so much about your work. I mean, you already share with us both your coordinating question or your central research question for your research agenda. You've even identified information or shared information about your methodology. I mean, that's exciting, the use of visual ethnography, especially visual ethnography as a method for answering questions that sit at the intersection of religion and Africana studies, or religion and identity. As another way to get at this and share some thoughts, you know, I often have read all of the books as much as I can of the late great theologian uh, and Black liberation theology scholar James Cone,
Mhm.
who was recorded as once saying that what people think about God, Jesus
Mhm.
Christ, and religion cannot be separated from their own social and political status in a given society. What we think about God and religion can't be separated from
Right.
our own social and political status in a given society. What are your thoughts and reactions to what Dr. Cohn shared?
What Dr. Cowan, I think, is seminal or really originary to how all of us as critical Black thinkers or scholars are thinking about religion. If it were not for folks like Cone, I wouldn't be doing my work. In fact, I was first introduced to Cone in seminary, but what's his most seminal work, of course, is Black Theology of Liberation, his classic text in 1975, but the study God of the Oppressed, even now, crossing the lynching tree. What Cone did, though, however, I think which was important, was he used the tools available to him, right? He used Tillich and correlational method, combined that with Barth, and came up with the conception and said, listen, we need to have new sources for doing Black theology. We need to look to Black experience. And his challenge to white theological, or what we call progressive white theological scholarship was this. You can't claim to have solidarity with God or even really know God unless you have solidarity with the oppression of Black peoples. And so again, Cohn's work is not only similar to our thinking, but I think he shows the kind of innovation in research that's necessary to kind of press our boundaries of how we conceive of the divine. Yes, I think we all need to think about what God means to us in our context, but we all got to recognize, especially those of us who are in academia, we are participating in a profession and disciplines that still, in the most part, were handed to us by others. And so what Cohn represents, I think, is a challenge for us to yes, be familiar and competent with your tools, but also be sure to push these boundaries to make sure they're speaking to specific experiences. And so in short, yes, I love Cohn. I also love Dolores Williams, who did some critique of his work as well. But these kind of seminal and original thinkers, I think, are the foundations upon which we build.
And your work also provides a foundation. I mean, in many ways, what Dr. Cohn has done and what other Black liberation theologians have done, connecting with what our colleagues in Africana studies and Black studies and those disciplines, even education, you know, are all sort of hacking away at this question about both what is, Blackness, what is, how do we understand Black life in America, and then how do we chart a path toward achieving Black equality, Black liberation? So, in your work, providing guidance in this struggle, really, toward Black belonging, Black sense of belonging, and Black liberation, what advice do you have for those who will tune into this episode, who will watch the recording, who no doubt are living like all of us through this historic pandemic, who have witnessed this summer and through this fall, this racial strife and interracial strife, who are looking at what last night in the presidential debate was called a dark fall, where we collide both with the pandemic and the election and the flu season. From your work, from your experience, what advice do you have for those who are looking for some hope in this quest toward liberation?
Well, I think what I like to sort of anchor our thoughts on, also, especially for those in African and Africana communities, to look to a long trajectory and history of resilience of our people. We've always been able to find resources for hope and forward movement in spite of the bleak circumstances. Now, doesn't mean we have to be utopian, right? It can mean that we engage in struggle, and the beauty of the struggle itself is a form of kind of resilience and community we have. We also, I think, need to acknowledge those who are more vulnerable than we are, right? And many of our colleagues don't have access to Teams or Zoom. Many of them are hurting financially. Racism is just one aspect of a long history of pandemics our people have experienced. And so while we have to be empathetic to this moment, I also think it's something to point to how resilient and creative we've always been as a people. So what's exciting, I think, about not only Virginia Union's mission, but also the principle. And I think why I'm so excited to contribute as a part of a really august faculty staff here at Virginia Union is this kind of idea that we're on the front lines of really making a difference, right? Not education is not simply about intellectual curiosity. Yes, it's that, but also we're in the business of trying to form and create an environment where decency and integrity and ideas of honesty and empathy are kind of inculcated in our own environment, in our students. And so I look forward most to being among student interlocutors and learning from them, in as much as I try to share information. And so I think in short, what I would say is that let's always learn how to be better, to do better, to be contributing members of a meaningful society. That's the call, at least is how I see it.
Such good advice, especially given our geographical location. I mean, we're located right here in the city of Richmond, the state of Virginia's capital, and many people who will watch this episode or the recording, I hope you'll either know or learn the history of Virginia Union and how it started and how it's evolved. I mean, from, a sort of single space to now a VUU global platform. And so much of that is reflective of exactly what Dr. Tinsley's talking about, and that is Black history and Black culture, which is the name of the center that you direct. So Dr. Tinsley, can you talk a little bit with us about the Center for African American History and Culture, its vision, mission, and some of its marquee initiatives?
Sure. That's the second, I guess, I think most exciting thing about being here was the opportunity for me to kind of be a part in the middle and the center of leading what I really think is an innovative Center for African American History and Culture that has several pillars, but I think they commit to Virginia Union's mission all along. One, it's about research and education, but also this long tradition of civic and community engagement. And so when hearing about the prospect, there are 3 or 4 arms we're focusing on. One is innovative research, right? So we'll start seeing in the next 5 years how this center can be a formative spot where PhD candidates, but also scholars will want to come to our center and do visiting research things, postdocs that really explore Virginia Union's history and culture, but also Virginia. I mean, it's no accident. We formed as Richmond Theological Seminary out of Lumpkin Jail. We combined with one of the first women's colleges, Story College. So there's a rich history and long tradition upon which we can build and do that. We're in the formative stages now, but you'll hear more about us trying to have a director for research and education, exploring the arts and making sure exhibitions go out, all centered around this one issue is how can Virginia Union really be the center and impetus for the vision of what Black futures are. And we'll do it through research and education, through community civic engagement, and also through the arts. I'm so excited that we have a rich heritage of the arts being at the center of how we educate and inform. Part of the reason why I use photography and why the arts are so important, there is a material embodiment, a material nature to our struggle that oftentimes we can't capture in words and concepts. And so I think the center could be a focal point of student development as well. Black study happens outside of scholarship in just classrooms, but I'm a huge proponent that Black studies happens in our engagements with each other, even if they're virtual, when we sit in spaces together, how we dream together. Think about the invisible institution of the Black church. Black studies happen wherever Black people are gathered, right? And so I think this center can be a focal point, one, for student development, for innovative research in Black studies, for civic and community engagement around diversity, equity, inclusion work in the city, but also can be a focal point if we engage in engagement with activists and artists in this city, being on the front lines of advocating for those in our communities most affected by these times.
So important. And we've received a question from the live Q&A. And so, and I'm going to ask that question, but also give you an opportunity to share a little bit more about your expertise and insight. So I was really interested in your bio. You write that as you describe your work, not only are you does your work lie at the intersection of religion and identity and Africana studies, but that you employ interdisciplinary and anti-disciplinary theoretical and analytic strategies. So the first question is if you'll talk with us a little bit about what you mean by anti-disciplinary theoretical strategies. And then the question from the Q&A is, given the way in which your work cuts across disciplines and fields, how does your work connect or relate to Black economics and religion?
Great. So I'll start with the first part of that question, answering about what I mean by interdisciplinary. It really is forms from some emerging thought really happening what they call critical studies, broadly with Black critical studies. Folks like Saidiya Hartman and Fred Moten who talk about other things. There's a small piece called The Undercommons by Fred Moten, who talks about our precarious position as academics and institutions, meaning we are, if you can think of it, both a part of but not belonging to this world. And so there is a subterranean kind of undercommons that exists, meaning Blackness itself as a category in Black studies is not something fundamentally that can be housed or managed or structured by any kind of disciplinary approach. So what I mean by inter and interdisciplinary is this. Yes, I think it's important based on the critical research questions we have to make sure that we develop expertise in certain methods, sociological methods, theological methods, phenomenological methods, with all that. But also I think as well, we have to recognize the nature of Black life is so complex, right? In many ways, it crosses so many terrains. It can't be reduced to any one particular method. Now, it doesn't mean that disciplines go away or methods go away. What it does mean is part of creativity and innovation is learning, once you get your footing in each discipline and you develop the expertise in them, how to bring them together in ways that provides innovative answers to certain research questions. So what I mean by inter and interdisciplinary is this. My current work, for instance, uses what I call critical Black religious thought. It uses, like I said, ethnography and social theory as well, but also uses what? Visual ethnography and video as well. I engage with Black critical theorists doing stuff in Englishes. I do some psychoanalysis in there. But the only way I think you can do that is if you have first kind of mastered this disciplines of what it happens. So it starts with religious studies as a critical academic discipline. But then, as you know, religious studies itself as a discipline really has many methods of answering the question. So what I mean by inter and anti is this. I'm located in the School of Arts and Sciences, but courses I look forward to offering, for instance, is a historical survey course that we cross-listed as history and religious studies in Black churches in the US, talking about its early formation, after emancipation, covering these 7 denominations, offering an interpretive perspective of kind of what's really at work there, linking religion to our quest for Black racial justice. I also plan on teaching a course off my monograph called Making Black Lives Matter on the religious implications of Black justice movements. In this course, we'll be looking really at Black Lives Matter, talking about its connections to religion in general, but also some of its challenges to religion and how it challenges some of us as practitioners to engage in these struggles. I mean, I pride myself in being both a practitioner as well, not only as an advocate for specific communities, but also as an ordained Baptist minister myself. And so what I mean by inter and interdisciplinary is that my training in humanities allows me to kind of do that. And I think what's innovative now in humanities and social sciences is how these bring these betters in categories. We have a theme here at Virginia Union about limitless possibilities. And early on in my graduate training, for me, it was about, I'm not limited by the disciplinary strictures of even my mentors or how I'm being trained. And what we see now, just like Cone and other folks, is we can't be confined by these things, right? And so that's what I kind of mean by that in the first part. Second part, as it relates to economics, right? I don't think you can talk about race or religion without having a thorough class analysis and socioeconomic analysis as well. Part of my, I did published an article about Black Protestant churches and how socioeconomic status affects not only beliefs, but also engagement with science. And so I think all of our work across the schools have definitely economic and financial implications. I think how studies in humanities and social sciences do 2 things. Humanities help to qualify the nature of Black life and humanity in ways that force us and students who come after us to think about the robust nature and expansiveness of Black life. I think quantitatively, social scientific approaches enable us to calculate, right? I mean, what are the things that stifle Black life options economically? Housing here in Richmond. I just recently posted an article where we talked about redlining enrichment along Jackson Ward, which is not too far from where I live at, right? So I think all of our theoretical lens offer real kind of material analytical insights. And through our center especially, that's going to engage it, help us do that. We'll be doing surveys, we'll be doing studies on Black communities here in Richmond especially, but in Virginia as a whole, to help us get at making these real financial impacts. I hope that begins to get at the question that was answered.
Absolutely. I think so. And then, I mean, just rich information. I can imagine all of our graduate students and doctoral students right now writing down interdisciplinary and thinking about how it connects to the questions that sort of energize and animate their own research program. So you spoke about some of your articles. One that I read in preparation for this interview is a paper that you and your colleagues wrote called Heaven and Health. It's really about race-based kind of differences between Christians and Christian congregations, about the relationship between faith and health. I don't, for folks who want to, read the fuller article, it was published in the Review of Religious Research, but I'm thinking about the role of the church and religious organizations and even Christian congregations through this pandemic. Any insights from your research about the role that churches and congregations might play as we navigate through this second or third wave of the pandemic?
Yeah, I have two thoughts. One, it relates to the nature of that research and the role that church have typically played and how they continue to play. For that study, I studied, I think, 2 or 3 congregations in urban settings in Houston, Texas, interviewing participants and members of these congregations about how they're informed about healthcare. Do they go to the website? Do they church their pastoral leaders as conveyors of information? What I found is something we've always known. The Black church, especially, meaning these churches that emerge and split from other denominations, have always been these repositories, not only of hope, but of real material living. We have social services through churches. Right now, people are getting fed all across this country from particular churches, but also as it relates to health, whether there's information about nutrition, doctors coming on site. In fact, if it were not for the Black church, I wouldn't be here today, especially. It was a mentor who came through church who sent me to a conference that had me interested in these questions. And as many know, many folks receive their first affirmation in these spaces. Why? Because for a lot of folk, it is the only space to access to what? To folk who are different than who they are. And even now we see churches being innovative at this moment. Yes, we've had to go virtual, but I know many churches across this country whose membership demographic don't have access to the kinds of internet streams that we do have. So they're doing creative things as much as they can, making sure they meet their members. And so I always feel the Black church will always be central to the welfare of Black communities. My scholarship also tries to expand it and say that I know that churches have always been the center of our scholarship, but there are also many other organizations going on doing this work as well. But the Black church will always be central and important for that reason, especially for the Black community. And I like to say it ain't going nowhere.
That's exactly right. Dr. Tinsley, I want to thank you for making time to join us for this first episode of Faculty Spotlight. We are so excited about the work that you're doing, both in the School of Arts and Sciences and certainly through the Center for African American History and Culture. Can you share with us, if folks want to contact you or stay tuned and be connected to learn more, how can they reach out?
Please feel free to email me at cvtinsley@vuu.edu. I've already reached out to as many faculty I've known here, just saying, hey, I'm here, eager to meet you. I'm excited to be here with you as well. So I'm happy to have coffee or virtually, not right now, and meet as many as you can. And I just look forward to being here with you and meeting our mission and strategic vision over the next 5 years. And thank you, Provost, so much for having me this morning. It's been an honor.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all so much for joining us for this first episode of the Faculty Spotlight at Virginia Union University. We certainly had an exciting and information-rich session with Dr. Cleve Tinsley, who is Assistant Professor of Religion and Africana Studies in the School of Arts and Sciences. I want to invite you to join us for our next episode, which will be October 30th with Dr. Shawan Mason. and criminal justice, and also on November 6th with Dr. George Ackerman. You'll look for those links on our social media, Virginia Union University. It's at VA Union 1865 on Twitter. It is Virginia Union University on both Facebook and LinkedIn. We look forward to you joining us. Thank you so much for your time. Have a great day.